And I'm your host, Andrew Whitfield-Cook. Joining us again today is Zelda Graham, a naturopath and nutritionist who specialises in epigenetics and MTHFR polymorphism management. Welcome back to Wellness by Designs. Zelda, how are you?
I'm great, Andrew. How are you today?
Good, thank you. Now, our topic for today is more issues with methylation. So obviously there's some issues. Let's first do a little bit of review, if you like. How does methylation support the body from a biochemical standpoint?
Well, when we need to methylate, it's so important for every other biochemical process. So if you're not methylating correctly, you're not able to control the rest of your biochemical pathways. So methylation controls not only our hormones, it controls our immune response. It also controls our stress response. So, how we react to stress. It also controls all of our neurotransmitters. So it's got a big role to play in our biopterin pathway. So it controls the dopamine, serotonin, and melatonin. It also controls our ability to make CoQ10. So it's got a massive link to controlling our heart. And therefore, it's got a massive also play in insulin. It's got everything, really, to be honest. If you're not methylating, that's where chronic illness will come up and tap you on the shoulder, really.
Okay, so here's the conundrum. If you've got such a broad landscape of disorders that methylation affects, how then do you pick out if somebody is suffering another issue with that biochemically, or if it's methylation that's causing it? Obviously, you've got to start back at testing, right?
Yeah, it's very important to test everything from, my favorite tests would be genetics, step one, organic metabolites to check the body's deficiencies, or the overproducing of some nasty biochemicals that we don't want and toxins. And also it's important to do a stool test to see viral and bacterial load. But other good indicators for methylation issues are the histamine levels in your blood. So if you're not processing histamine, that means you've got high histamine, and that usually is an indication of a methylation issue. And also, so does low histamine in your blood indicate your ability, whether you're under or over methylation. So I always recommend those tests along with homocysteine, because homocysteine is in the next biochemical pathway. So if you can't methylate, that methyl group is not been able to give to the methionine pathway, which therefore means that homocysteine is not either getting made or recycled or made into methionine or that enzyme S-adenyl methionine. So then that causes a whole heap of other issues. So when homocysteine builds up in your blood, it causes high blood pressure and starts attacking the heart. So there's the link to heart disease as well. And we also need homocysteine for our detoxification. So if it's not getting processed correctly, then we've got detoxification issues. So, yeah.
Okay, so just going back there, obviously, once you get symptoms, particularly things like hypertension, that's way further along. You're now getting a pathological process embedded into your pathophysiology. So if we work backwards, what would be some of your first key things that you would go, maybe you've got a methylation issue? What would be some of those things that they might even be a little bit grey, a little bit misty, if you like, but you might suspect methylation?
Yeah. Well, I really dig deep into family history. That's one of my big things. I could spend maybe 20 minutes. I ask everything from what's your mom's health like, what's your mom's health like, what's your mom's dad's health like, what's your dad's health like, what's your dad's health like, because that's where the genetics can be funneled through down into when that zygote got formed for them when they were born, and also the circumstances of the parents' diet, and if they had already a methylation issue and both parents both have a methylation issue, then we have the nasty homozygous methylation issue, which unfortunately is one of the worst to fix and solve. So you just got to hope you've got a heterozygous, which means you only got it from one parent. So I always ask lots of questions about family health. And therefore, when I see anything from heart disease, high blood pressure, arthritis, osteoporosis, diabetes, cancer, things like that, autism, depression, schizophrenia, then, ADHD, all of those mental illnesses, they can all be linked back into methylation as well. So that's where I start digging deep, and then I go, look, I really feel we need to check your genetics to see if you're methylating properly. But, on that note, though, as well, sometimes they don't have the MTHFR gene, okay? So that's where we got to dig even deeper, because they have DHFR, which is dihydroreductase, which is the first gene that has to pass on that folate to make it to tetrahydrofolate. And then it passes that on to MTFD1, methyl tetrahydrofolate D1. And then methyl tetrahydrofolate D1 passes that then on to MTHFR. So it's interesting. I've just recently had a case where someone didn't even have the MTHFR. However, they had the MTFD1, they had the dihydrofolate as well, and then they had all of the B12 genes. So it wasn't even the methylation actual issue. It was the fact that tetrahydrofolate could not even get broken down to help the MTHFR gene do its job. So whilst, it's not just MTHFR is what I'm trying to say. It's
So when you say they didn't even have the MTHFR, you're talking about they didn't have the SNP, the double allele.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
They didn't have any mutation in that backbone of that enzyme's functionality, but they had all the rest of them. So the poor methylation couldn't work because the other genes weren't working. So now once we fix the other genes, therefore that methyl group can get passed on properly to the MTHFR. Therefore, it can finally do its job. Whereas before, it just couldn't get that methyl group that it needed.
So therefore, if you weren't aware to look higher and you just looked at MTHFR alleles, then you could think, there's no problem, quote unquote, here, where there is. It's just upstream. Okay, exactly. So therefore we've got to choose the right test.
100%. And that's where we also then have to do that test before you supplement. Because if you give someone who is an over-methylator the wrong supplement, or an under-methylator, if you have somebody that was over-methylating, something like acetyl methionine, it can actually make them really suicidal. It's the wrong way to go. And just because they have MTHFR, people think, oh, here we go, have some methylfolate, have some, P5P, have this, have that, take some SAMI, you'll feel great. That's not actually the way forward. You have to check backstream, you have to check upstream, and you have to check all of the symptoms, including that histamine levels in the blood. So that's my favorite. So if you've got low histamine in the blood, that means they are an over-methylator. Okay?
Gotcha.
So that's why you never would give, so you never give acetyl methionine for an over-methylator. And also then you also have to check, do they have DHFR? Because dihydrofolate reductase, it loves a different form of folate. And sometimes it can't break down methylfolate. So when I see DHFR, I always look at folinic acid, which has got a calcium backbone of the already active form of folate converted. So if you've got DHFR, that's the best way forward to help the NTFHR gene do its job. Yes, that sounds very complicated, but that's why you have to.
How much do you try and support these patients though with food to say, okay, if we're we could be running around doing the wrong thing with supplementation, we obviously have to get food right at the beginning anyway. If you've got histamine intolerance, then that's a whole dietary package on its own. Where do you start with this?
Well, one of the big things would be even B12, to be honest, because if you don't even have B12 in your body, it's very difficult to even bind or get that intracellular folate going on anyway. So I tend to look at more of the basic Bs. So I look at B1, B2, B3, B5, and B12 would be my starting point. Yep. Then I'd also look at, do we need to look at, obviously I feel like everyone needs to be supported with magnesium. So magnesium is such a vital cofactor to, I don't know how many functionalities in the body. It's huge. Yeah, I was about to say 200 plus maybe. So I tend to support with a basic protocol first before we get the results. And then when we get the results, then you can assess, well, oh, okay, you've got this. That means your body will accept methylfolate. Fantastic. Then you try a small dose first, and you always tune in 3 to 5 days later. How are you feeling?
Right.
Are you feeling better?
Right.
Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling jittery? Because if they are, stop, because it's not working for them. Then you need to look at a different type of getting that folate into the cells.
Are the adverse effects, if you like, of MTHFR, start again. Are the adverse effects of MTHF always of an emotional component, or do you get physical components as well? You said jittery, that can tie in with emotions. What about things like palpitations, headaches, nausea, things like that? Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. If you give someone the wrong supplementation and they start feeling sick, as in they wake up first thing in the morning and they describe to you they feel like they want to throw up, well, then we're on the wrong supplement. If they're getting headaches, then we're also on the wrong supplement. And this is where you got to look upstream and downstream. Like the headaches is usually linked into the glucuronidation pathway. And therefore, if you're giving too many methyl groups, that's causing the headaches. So this is where the over-methylation and the under-methylation is so vital to get right. And that's why it's better to take baby steps. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So if we're talking about an over-methylator, an over-producer, if you like, do we have to obviously take the load off, stop supplementing? But do you also use, like you mentioned, glucuronidation, things like that? Do you also use detoxification processes, clearing the body, even things like magnesium oxide maybe, to help cleanse the gut of the byproducts that may be coming out in the urine and the bowel?
Yeah, and definitely. And that's why once you've done, your organics metabolite test, that's a fantastic way to see that is the problem. You can easily spot the Chironian pathway in the organic metabolites results. You can spot the toxic load. If they've got lots of neurotoxic organic metabolites in their urine, then you have to start, especially if we're talking about depression or anxiety or schizophrenia, if they've got those organic metabolites really built up in their urine, well, then you have to look at, is glutamate being properly made into GABA? And if it's not, why? Therefore, something like an amino acid like taurine can really help. And it's interesting, people that do wake up and feel nausea, it's usually a buildup of glutamate toxicity or ammonia, which is another pathway that's blocked. So taurine is a fantastic solution for anyone that feels nausea. Headaches, I normally would really support the glucuronidation pathway. So calcium D-glutarate is fantastic for anyone that gets headaches. That's my go-to for that. And then obviously then we have to look at food. Okay, so food is so important. When you can't methylate, you need the greens. You've got to eat the leafy greens. You've got to embrace lots of steamed broccoli. Fantastic Brussels sprouts. Anything green, leafy, green. The only greens you never ever need to be worried about is if we've got oxalate issues. So there's obviously some of those greens of high oxalates. So if you've got an oxalate issue, just be aware of some of those.
Oh, great. So that was going to be my next question, is that there's that subset seems to be raising its head more and more. But again, it seems to double back, if you like, onto gut health. So we sort of come back to the pillar of naturopathic medicine, that's heal the gut. But obviously with avoidance of that, so avoiding things like spinach leaf, baby spinach, what other food stuffs do you tend to avoid with an oxalate issue?
Well, generally, if I find anyone does have a methylation issue, if I do discover they have MTFHR, I've got like 5 that I say they're very high. So I ask people to avoid raspberries. I ask them to avoid carrots. I know everyone loves their carrots, but I just sort of say, let's replace the carrots with pumpkin or sweet potato. Celery is so high in oxalates. So some people go crazy and do that celery juicing and then don't understand why they've got no energy and feel fatigued. It's because the body can't break down that high level of oxalic acid. So that's 3 that I really focus on. And I'm afraid sesame. So that doesn't go down well with the people that love the hummus. So I apologize to the hummus fans out there, but sesame is very, very high in oxalates. So I always have, a few. And I just say, like, make your own hummus, but you can use hemp seeds instead of sesame, okay? It doesn't have the high level of oxalate. And then there is, though, a history of if they've even had a kidney stone, or have they had a gallbladder stone, or even worse, have they even had their gallbladder removed? That is a definite sign of methylation issue and oxalate issue. And then there's another list of food groups that I ask people to avoid as well when we have a kidney stone or a gallstone already happening or had happened. That list.
Let's go into it because we're there.
Oh, okay, right. So the one that everyone hates when I tell them this is, so sorry, but chocolate's not your friend. Chocolate's really high in oxalates. So replace your chocolate with carob. That's much better. Rhubarb, that's not a great thing to eat if you've had kidney or gallstones. Miso, any soy products. Buckwheat, and this is the other one, almonds. Almonds are very high in oxalates. So I try to say to people that are drinking almond milk, if you've got an oxalate issue, try to replace that with coconut milk. Organic coconut milk will be much better for you.
You know how there's that idea that people are attracted to, if you like, they crave the things that they're allergic to, or they avoid them. It's sort of like dichotic, but anyway, do you find that these people are those people that eat a lot of these foods? Like they love their raspberries, they love their carrots, they love their hummus? Yeah.
100%. And that's why I just go, well, there's your gallstone, or there's your gallbladder removal. And if it's just something that they have to embrace. I give lots of alternatives when we have a situation like that. So raspberries replaced with blueberries, carrots replaced with pumpkin, and sesame replaced with hemp seeds, celery replaced with leek.
Now, hemp seeds, I need to ask you about this one. It's very interesting to me. I've never tasted them. What do they taste similar to? Do they taste like hummus?
I have to say no. They've got a very mild taste. So when I ask people to make their hummus with hemp seeds, I would ask them to put in a wee pinch of cumin just to give it a little bit of more je ne sais quoi. It helps smooth out the pain of the no tahini. Oh, and the other high oxalate food is beetroot. So beetroot, if you've had kidney or gallstones, beetroot's not your friend. So I try to say to people, replace the beetroot in your salads with radish. And, that's why when you look at these juicing menus, you'll always see carrots, celery, beetroot. And I'm like, oh my goodness, it's mind blowing because we should not be juicing those things. They're very high in oxalates. That's another conversation for another day.
That's a huge conversation. Okay. So we've gone through over-methylation. What about under-methylation?
Yeah, so when someone's under methylation, usually for me, the big things that I look for is massive depression. Like I'm talking chronic depression, schizophrenia, suicidal tendencies. That's one of the big, massive indicators you can see for an under methylator. But also things like OCD, they're very meticulous with detail. They're also a very addictive nature. So they would be addicted on iPhone addiction, computer addiction. They also can seem to be calm on the outside, but it's like they've got this huge inner vibration on the inside. So they're just always feeling like on that edge. So sort of, fight or flight sort of person. And then they tend to obviously react very badly to stress as well.
So when you say react very badly to stress, sorry, Zelda. So when you say react very badly to stress, are these the people that run themselves into the ground because they're high achievers,
yes.
They're a little bit meticulous, and they just go to exhaustion?
Yeah, and then they end up with this, what everyone calls chronic fatigue, and they end up lying in bed for a few days because they've just done so much, taken on so much, and then they blame that for the chronic fatigue, whereas it's really all about not methylating correctly. Now, when you're an under-methylator, that's where acetyl methionine actually comes in fantastically if you're an under-methylator. But I would never give anyone acetyl methionine until I tested their histamine blood levels, just to check.
Gotcha.
And with the over-methylators, it's things that I look at for them is it's interesting. They're not depressed or suicidal. They're more anxious. They will tend to speak a lot. So, if you get a customer sitting down and they're sitting there and you're trying to even just get in a word edgeways, that's a good sign of overmethylation. They'll have a low sex drive. Sometimes an overmethylator will be a bit more on the obese side. I always look out for that nervous leg syndrome, somebody that's just sitting there talking fast, the leg is shaking. That's a perfect sign of overmethylation as well. Low motivation. They tend to do a lot of talking, but don't have a lot of motivation to actually do things. They can be depressed and anxious, but they tend to not be more on the suicidal side compared to the under-methylators.
Right. There seems to be some symptoms there sort of at odds with each other. You've got this anxious talkativeness, but they're low libido, obese, shaky legs, but with poor sort of output. That's weird.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. It's like you nearly literally have to be a detective. You actually have to be a detective in everything from what they do, their lifestyle, what they eat, how they sleep, how their moods are. I ask so many questions to try and pinpoint what we're dealing with while we're waiting for the test results to come back. And then when you do, and that's where, to be honest as well, that's why you need to check all the genes. It's not just about MTHFR. There's a lot of B12 genes that need to really be more addressed, I feel, because certain genes, especially if you've got the MUT2 in B12, you actually can't absorb methyl B12, and you can't even get hydroxy B12 into the cells. And this is where this overmethylation becomes dangerous, because if you can't methylate and you're giving somebody methyl B12, there's nowhere for that methyl group to go because the B12 can't get into the system. So this is where, you need to look at all of the B12 genes. So there's methionine reductase, methionine synthase, then there's TCN2, FUT2, and then MUT2. I always look at those B12 genes because sometimes it's actually just the B12 and not even the MTHFR because they can't, that methyl group that MTHFR has to pass to methionine reductase, if they've got a polymorphism in methionine reductase, it can't actually properly take that methyl group. So therefore B12 doesn't get into the system, doesn't get into the cells, doesn't get recycled. Therefore, we have anemia. So, if you don't have B12 and you don't have intracellular folate, you can't make or bind iron, and you can't make new red blood cells. So this is where you become a bit more of a detective. You got to look at the bloods as well. So anemia is always a methylation issue or a B12 issue as well.
Right. Okay. So bang for buck, where do you start? Like, do you just do all of them at once because they're all going to be showing you some part of a puzzle? Or do you say, no, I reckon you're this, or no, maybe that?
Look, health is our wealth, but as we all know, good health doesn't come cheap, right? So I generally assess, budget. I actually asked, I go, look, what are we able to afford here? Because to me, the buck stops first off with genetics because I know so much about it. So for me, the genetic test is my first call because from those genetic test results, I can exactly see all those things that I'm talking about. If they can afford the OMX along with the genetics test, the organics metabolite test, that's my second test that I love. The third would be a stool to see viral and bacterial, because let's face it, if you're not methylating, you don't have a good immune response. If you're not methylating, you've got a high chance you've also got SIBO. We discussed that in the last podcast. So the SIBO's there, therefore the bacterial overgrowth will be there. But once we get methylation and the methionine pathway working a lot better, the SIBO starts improving, and then the gut lining gets better, and then the immune response gets stronger. So that's why I generally do the stool more towards the end, just to check that everything's going where we want it to go. And I generally try to see if we can get the doctors to run the homocysteine and the histamine blood tests.
Okay. So with histamine blood tests, tell us about this. I thought there was a real a block wall, basically, trying to get doctors to prescribe this, to write these requests.
Well, I mean, if someone has constant histamine allergies and seasonal allergies, they're more well within their rights to ask their doctor to check the histamine in their blood. So I generally, say to people, well, you've obviously had this histamine issue your whole life. There's no reason why your doctor won't do that. And doctors will do it. Some will and some won't. However, if they don't, well, then you can order it privately. You can order any test privately.
Gotcha.
But I, as I said, I try to chance the arm first. And homocysteine, gosh, that's another one. I could spend an hour just talking about homocysteine. But, a quick take on homocysteine, if you've got low homocysteine, that's just nearly as dangerous as high homocysteine. Because if you've got low homocysteine, there's no homocysteine left to be properly converted back into methionine. And there's no homocysteine left to go into your Krebs cycle to make energy. So there's your chronic fatigue. And if you're not making enough homocysteine, you're not able to make enough glutathione. So you're not detoxifying correctly. And then if you're making too much homocysteine and you're not recycling it, well, then that's where the heart disease comes into play and the blood pressure issues. So when you've got a family history of heart disease, triple bypasses, high blood pressure, anything like that, that's where you know for definite there's a methylation issue and a homocysteine issue.
Okay, so we've discussed most of what can go wrong with the incorrect treatment or guideline, if you like, protocol. What we've looked at what sort of symptomatology people get when they're either over or under methylators. If we're going to be looking at doing a test, doing judicious supplementation to run the cogs, forgive me, I'm doing quotation marks here on screen, is it appropriate that we support people who are, let's say, I'm going to hope this is right, over-methylators, so they're overproducing? Would it be appropriate to support these people with the end byproducts? So let's say glutathione. If we're talking about the homocysteine cycles and then it goes down to sulfate glutathione, what would happen if you supplemented with glutathione or lipoic acid? Do you get a bank up, or do you get an easement of the overproduction? Like, that's where I get confused.
Yeah, and this is the problem, right? Because until you do the test, you don't know what pathways are actually blocked. So if the detox pathway, phase 1 and 2, is already blocked, and you give somebody glutathione, it can actually make them feel sick. So I try to leave the detoxification at least into phase 3 of the protocol once I've ascertained what is actually going on. But in the background, I've already started on the diet, so gluten is not your friend when you cannot methylate. Gluten is no one's friend, but again, that's another large conversation. But gluten blocks the gallbladder and stops the ability for the liver to do its job. So gluten's not good for neurotransmitters or your gallbladder. And gluten blocks the folate receptors, so then you can't methylate at all. And then I always ask for people to stop dairy, because if we've got a hormonal issue, if we have a methylation issue, we don't need cow hormones and steroids into the mix, confusing the body and the pancreas. Because you'll also find blood sugar is a big issue for people that can't methylate. There's always a history of diabetes somewhere with someone. And that's definitely where I say, let's just stop the dairy for now until we know what exactly is going on. And then I support those starter Bs. I support the magnesium, potassium. If they're feeling nauseous, we go in with the taurine. If they've got the headaches, the calcium D-glutarate, an awesome option for that. And then when we get the results, we can go, aha, here we go. So now I know the genes you've got. Now I know what you're overproducing or underproducing. And therefore you go nice and slowly with either folinic, or if they're able to take 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, you start with a small dose first, tune in with them, within a week, check everything's going okay, and then you slowly increase until you've got them to that level where they go, wow, I feel a 50% improvement. And then I go, that's fantastic. Now let's go for 100.
Gotcha. Well, with regards to just something I forgot to ask earlier, when you were talking about supplementing with B vitamins, do you tend to favour the activated B vitamins over the old, pyridoxine hydrochloride, thiamine chloride, things
100%. Like the activated ones, it's hard. They've all got these big, long, extra long names, but the activated ones are the easiest, quickest result that you will get because it's already activated. It's already being converted. The body will just see it and go, oh, I've been looking for you, and just completely mop it up. So the activated would be my preferred for the starter protocol.
And what also about when we're talking about magnesium, do you tend to favour different types? Like, look, I've got to say companies have done this, but we've been taught to use that, and the words are wrong in my opinion, but anyway, we've been taught that glycine is the best. I think it's one of the fastest, but it's not necessarily the best. If you've got a heart condition, give me orotate. But, other forms, like, for instance, the German research, they favour the citric acid, the magnesium citrate. There's some practitioners favour the glycerophosphate to help to get across the blood-brain barrier and also help with gut healing as well. Do you tend to sort of use different forms depending on what's happening with your patients?
100%. And especially if we're dealing with suicidal anxiety or depression, magnesium threonate is a definite. Like, straight away, someone says to me, I feel anxious, I feel depressed, I've got suicidal, tendencies. While they're talking to me, I'm reaching for it already. So, and it's really about symptoms again. And then if we've got constipation issues, then, and like, look, there is 8 different types of magnesium. So it's not one size fits all. I try to actually give them as many as I can. I tend to give people at least 4 to 5. So there's some great tri-mag blends out there where you can get 3 types of magnesium in one supplement. So that's a great starter straight up to give someone. And then if we've got the anxiety and the depression, then I add in magnesium threonate to take at night time to calm down their neurological function.
I've got to say, and I am going to give a call out to somebody here. I met with James Bergen. Hi, James. And he, at the end of our meeting, he gave me a drink. He said, "Do you want a magnesium drink?" I said, "Yeah, sure." Expecting the typical magnesium, oh, it's a citrus flavor or it's a whatever flavor, which is really covering a mineral chalky flavor, right? And he mixed this magnesium with a vitamin C powder. I've got to get the exact recipe of him. It was the most natural tasting. There was no quote unquote supplement taste to this. It was just like drinking a natural fruit juice. Not that that's necessarily a great thing, but the taste was just beautiful. There was no cloying aftertaste. There was no mineral chalkiness with this. It was, James, dude.
Yeah, I want that recipe too, please. That'd be great. And then let's not forget how important vitamin C is as well. So vitamin C is needed in lots of our biochemical pathways too. And how many people are actually sitting down and cutting up an orange and eating an orange every day because it's water soluble. We need vitamin C every day, and it's needed in our biopterin pathway. It's needed in our methionine pathway. It's needed in lots of our pathways. So again, vitamin C's are always a great thing to have. If you're not eating an orange, then you need to be taking some vitamin C too.
It's probably one of the nutritional supplements that I most overlook. And I've over the last, let's say, year, I've woken up to, wow, I've really sort of, in my arrogance of quote unquote knowledge, I'm using a lot of quotation marks this podcast, forgive me, but in my arrogance of what I call knowledge, I've forgotten the simplest things can be some of the most beneficial things, these supportive foundational nutrients.
Yeah, because sometimes we, as practitioners, we get enamored with everything that's in a container and forget sometimes about the importance of real food. So I just try to get into a habit. I'm at my desk, I cut up an orange and just munch on at least one a day. That's just, a bit of a behavior.
But I'm going to add to that though. I'm going to add to that though, and that is that in the 21st century and certainly post-COVID pandemic, post-lockdown, I think this is a new epoch in human history, but anyway, there are so many people that are so stressed that they're churning through these basic nutrients, just running their brains and their adrenal response to stress. So that's what it sort of woke me up, and I went, oh my goodness, like we've got to go back to these really foundational nutrients to bring these people out of a hole. So I've started to use just simple stuff so much more.
Yeah, and we are what we eat as well, and that's why it's really important to remove that gluten, the dairy. Try to eat always organic, because if it's not organic, it's been sprayed with glyphosate, and that damages so much in the body, confuses all of our biochemical pathways, and always also the importance of our meat source now. So now you have to say things like grass-fed, organic, hormone-free, steroid-free meat. It's like, because even our protein source is nowhere near as good as what it should be. So it's really important to have a good whole food diet. I try to say to people, if it comes out of a packet, it's not really what you should be eating. You've got to go back to the base: good berries, organic wild berries, blueberries, blackberries, organic oranges, lemons, limes, apples, red grapes, organic kiwi fruit, watermelon, and bring in the broccoli, all the greens as much as you can, and just some really good quality protein. That's a very good base protocol for the diet, along with some good quality nuts, depending on if we have oxalate issues or not.
I take your point about trying to eat organic, that they can be horrendously expensive sometimes. And so I love Tabitha McIntosh's book here. It's One Bite at a Time. Eating Your Way to Better Health. I think that's the byline, but it's One Bite at a Time by Tabitha McIntosh and Sarah Lance. And she talks about having your organic buck. So it's like, what are you most going to prioritize with that amount of your expenditure that is most important to you? There are other things that you just may not be able to afford, but there's really this you need to concentrate on. You've given us so many key things here that we can move from. Zelda, I love chatting with you.
Dozen. There's always the dirty dozen that's the most important to buy organic. Potatoes are heavily sprayed. Blackberries are heavily sprayed. Strawberries are heavily sprayed. Tomatoes are heavily sprayed. So, look up the dirty dozen list. And that's what I try to say. If you can't afford all organic, then these are the 12 musts. Like, this is not even an option. I'd rather you not eat them if you're not eating organic, because that's how heavily sprayed they are.
I love chatting with you. We could chat for hours. I know we can. We've run out of time today, but I can't thank you enough. I just want to show everybody who's going to be watching this video. That's my notes with Zelda. You've given us so much to go on from. We'll put up as much as we can in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today, Zelda. And no doubt we'll see you again for another topic to do with methylation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Again, I say we will put up as much as we can in the show notes. You can get all of the other podcasts on the Designs for Health website. I'm Andrew Whitfield-Cook. This is Wellness by Designs.